Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. Today's program will look at the impact of COVID-19 on education in San Francisco. This event is hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the Joint Information Center of the San Francisco COVID Command Center. Some housekeeping for you this morning. The audio, the video, and the chat will be monitored and recorded for record keeping, for training, and for quality assurance. By default, all participants will be muted and video turned off to minimize distraction. And to submit a question or comment, please select the chat button at the bottom of your screen and send a message to Q&A. Your questions will be collected and shared with the Interfaith Council after the meeting for response. Encouragement to everyone to get tested to stop the spread of COVID-19. For more information about eligibility details, please visit sf.gov/gettestedsf or simply call 311. And once again, welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. I will now hand it over to the Executive Director, Michael Pappas.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and to you and to John McKnight and to Sharon Walton. We want to say a very special thank you for helping to facilitate these online briefings. They are critical to our sector, but also to the greater community. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this morning's online briefing for faith leaders. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, so do the risks we face. The COVID-19 pandemic has not stopped at national borders. It has affected people regardless of nationality, level of education, income, race, and gender. But the same has not been true for its consequences, which have hit the most vulnerable the hardest. Education is no exception. Students from privileged backgrounds, supported by their parents and eager and able to learn, could find their way past closed school doors to alternative learning opportunities. Those from disadvantaged backgrounds often remain shut out when their schools shut down. This crisis has exposed the many inadequacies and iniquities in our education systems. This week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team, will offer a unique view into the challenges and creative solutions our city is employing to support students, faculty, families, and academic administrative systems in this time of the COVID-19. And now it gives me great pleasure and privilege to welcome the chairman of the board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Kaushik Roy, who will offer a welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kaushik, and on behalf of the board, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this week's gathering. By coincidence, I realized this morning, September 17th, marks exactly 6 months since our shelter in place began. And for me, I know, and for many folks, I'm sure it certainly feels a lot longer than that. But the council, during almost this entire time, feels very fortunate to have the opportunity to host these meetings on a week-by-week basis, always with really great topics. And the full credit for that, of course, goes to our incredible duo of staff members, Michael and Cynthia Zambucas. So I also want to acknowledge their amazing efforts in doing this and so much more that has been required since the pandemic began, on top of everything else they do on a day-to-day basis. I want to also give a special welcome to any of you who may be joining us for the first time. Thank you very much for being here. At the beginning of every interfaith event or meeting, there is an interfaith statement we like to read to try to bring to focus why we all gather together. So I'll read that and then we will get started. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you, Kaushik, and thank you for your leadership and the leadership of the board during this time. Your support has really enabled Cynthia and I to do our work more efficiently and effectively, and thank you for your wise counsel always and partnership. I'd like at this point to invite to ground us in a meditative moment, Kashif Abdullah, a friend and colleague. Kashif is the San Francisco Islamic School's teacher, administrator, and board member. So he will speak to us from a Muslim perspective and offer this meditative moment.
Thank you, Reverend Pappas, and thanks to the Interfaith Council, organizing committee, and board members. Thank you for putting this together and inviting me to be part of this blessed event. I was asked by Reverend Pappas to offer a short reflection, meditation. As you said, I was born and raised in San Francisco. I'm a product of the San Francisco public school system. We have Dr. Vince Matthews here. If it's the same Vince Matthews, he was my teacher in a summer program back in 1989 at Aim High. So maybe I'll confirm that with him later on. I served in the military. Back then, he had the Jerry curls, though. I served in the military and worked as an electrical engineer before I changed my course into education. So I've been working as an educator for the last 8 years, and I'm very happy in the career path that I've taken. In terms of the reflection, it's very short according to the Islamic tradition. It's very simple. We praise God. We recite a few verses from the Quran, which is our holy book, and then we reflect maybe on a few of the verses, and we get the meeting underway. At the San Francisco Islamic School in the morning, our students, we recite the first chapter of the Quran. It's called Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the opening. So I will just recite those 7 verses and then share the meaning with you, and then maybe share 2 short verses that I had written on my screensaver back in college. Back there, and we had something called screensavers that would pop up on our screen to protect our screen. We don't have those anymore, I don't think. So let me start. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. Ihdina as-sirata al-mustaqim. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. So the translation for this, and Allah, we say in the word for God in Arabic is Allah. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, all praises to Allah, the Lord of the worlds, the Beneficent, the Merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. Thee do we serve, and thee do we ask for help. Keep us on the straight path, the path of those whom how thou hast bestowed favors, and not the path of those upon thy wrath is brought down, nor those who go astray. So this is something we recite every day. It's the first chapter of the Quran. Referring back to the difficult time that we're having, there was 2 short verses I would like to reflect on. Like I said, I had them written on my screensaver back in college. My mom had just passed away. I just got married. I was looking for a job. It was a difficult time for me. And I reflected back on the Quran to chapter 94, which is called the expansion. And God was talking to the prophet. He was going through a difficult time, just as all prophets did. There were challenges that they met, and they met it with patience and perseverance. So he was reminding the prophet, be patient, victory will come, have patience, and rely on God. So that's exactly what I did. These 2 short verses, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, which means with hardship cometh ease. With hardship cometh ease. And those 2 verses repeated one after another. So I want to remind not only the faith community, all of us, that these are difficult times, especially for our children who may not understand what's going on. With hardship will come ease. And also with hardship, we build character. At the same time, we need to count all of our blessings. In my opinion, there have been more blessings than hardship. We've been coming closer to our family, spending more time with our children, coming together as just, before we were multiple communities, now we're coming together as a community. As an example today, this morning, where all faiths are coming together to to challenge COVID and to come up with solutions for a difficult time for all of our children. We've become better teachers. So we thank God for that, for making us better parents, for making us better teachers, for making us better people, human beings, and for teaching us how to be patient. So I know Reverend Pappas, you gave me a few minutes, so I'm just going to stop it there with the opening of with the recitation of the Quran, and it's a couple of verses that I remember from college that I still hold dear today, and I remind my students of it. I want to remind all of us as well to be patient and to take advantage of the time that we have with our family, and to work together for a better community in a time where we have a lot of political turmoil. And we need to work together and to move forward and make this world a better place for all of us, especially our children. Thank you so much for having me. Look forward to hearing from the rest of the panel.
Bless you, Kashif. You are a valued member of our community and our interfaith community, and we look forward to being in closer engagement in the times to come. We are very, very blessed today and fortunate today and privileged today to have two presenters, Dr. Vincent Matthews, who is the superintendent of the San Francisco Unified School District. He is the top executive of the 8th largest school district in California and the 3rd largest employer in San Francisco, as well as Anna Validzik, who is the team lead for Schools and Child Care Hub for the COVID Command Center's community branch from the San Francisco Department of Public Health. In the spirit of time, I want to hand the stage over to Dr. Matthews. Thank you for being with us as a parent of 3. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and I'm sure that sentiment is shared with many of our attendees on the line and those who will hear the recording link when they receive it.
So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am presenting from my car. I'm not driving, so I want you to know, but I am presenting from my car, and I just want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to say, first of all, it's an honor to be sharing with you, with Anna also. We've done many town halls together, so it's always an honor to present with her and to hear what from the health perspective, from the data and science perspective, which is so important. So it's an honor to be presenting with her. And to Kashif, I was going to say, yes, I am that Vincent Matthews until you mentioned the Jerry curl. We all have things in our lives that we regret, and that wearing that Jerry curl for a number of years is one of those things. So I appreciate this opportunity, and it's an opportunity to share with you. I'm also a product of the San Francisco Unified School District, born and raised here in San Francisco, and it's been my proud privilege to start in San Francisco Unified as a preschool student, and then many years later come back and be the superintendent of the district that poured so much into me. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. If we could start the slides, thank you so much. So you can go on to the next slide. So these are what I'm going to talk to you today is about, as you heard earlier, 6 months ago, we went into shelter in place. The district we went to distance learning, which is the educator in one place and the students in another place. And so with that, I'm going to give you some of the bright spots over the last 6 months, but really want to talk about the journey of the district so you'll know where we have been and what's coming. So these are some of the bright spots. Immediately going into shelter in place, many people realize that the district is more than just a place where students come to learn. It's also a place where for many of our students, most of their meals come through them being in school in the district. So to date, we have served over 1.5 million meals. When we went to distance learning, we already knew that there was a digital divide.
Dr. Matthews, your microphone may be obstructed.
Is this better?
Much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. We knew with the pandemic, we knew that there is a digital divide, so that with that digital divide, we knew that we had to make sure that we were, actually, I'm just going to make sure because Okay, I just wanted to make sure the camera. Okay, there we go. We knew that there's a digital divide, so we started providing technology access for our students. We've provided almost 13,000 or 12,500 laptops and 3,500 internet hotspots. So students don't just have the device, but they can actually get online. We started distance learning in March and continue today. We started a process of doing wellness checks for all of our students. Every one of our students receives a call, has received a call, and continued into the fall receiving calls from the district to check on them, how they're doing. You know, what do they need? Do they need food? Do they need devices? Whatever else we can do. Certain things we can provide, certain things we can. And if we can't provide it, then we give them access or the lines to get to those needs they have. And we also have a resource line where families can call in if we haven't reached out or haven't reached out to them. We as frequently as they need. We have a resource link line on our website where they can reach out to us. So these are some of the bright spots to date that we have initiated in the district, and we're really proud of these. Next slide. So in the fall, we went through a process and we determined that we were going to have distance learning. So this is where we are right now. There's not in-person learning in place. Distance learning is throughout the district. And while we're doing this, we are considering a gradual return. We'll be talking more about this at our board meeting actually this Tuesday night about what this looks like and what we're going through to begin the possibility of bringing small, limited groups of students back. The goal, of course, is for us to eventually get back to where all students are back in place. And we want to have that gradual return once science and data suggest it's safe to do so. Next slide. So to talk about that planning for phase 2, next slide. So these are the groups that we're looking at initially bringing back. We said small groups. So and this was actually through our summer, we had town halls, as I mentioned earlier. And through those town halls, these groups have remained the groups that we're focusing on, our youngest learners and our students, our special education students who have moderate to severe disabilities. We know that these are the groups who we believe that distance learning has had the most limited impact. So we're trying to get those students back as quickly as possible. So that will be our focus as we're thinking about small group hybrid learning. And then the goal would be to enlarge that as data and science suggest it's safe to do so. Next slide. Next slide. So these are, when we're thinking about distance learning, what we have been focused on are these 3 C's that we're calling them, is that when we started in the spring, none of us had, been in a pandemic, and none of us had, were forced as an entire system to provide education over distance. And this is what we found were some of the barriers to that were what you see here. And this has been our focus in the fall, making sure that there's connection, making sure that there's communication between the teacher and the student and the students in the classroom. Because that was one of the things that students told us, that they wanted to be not only connected with the teacher, but with each other. And then we needed to make sure there was consistency. So parents would know when instruction was taking place, what kind of instruction was taking place. So this has been our focus over this time of distance learning. Next slide. These are our priorities. We want, as I said, consistency, so parents know what to expect and when to expect it. Making sure the pandemic has definitely, we know throughout society, there were practices in place, racist practices. And so we have had a focus on anti-racist leadership and anti-racist instruction, because the pandemic has absolutely shown a light and exacerbated some of the racial tensions and racist practices that have been in place in our systems for some time. So we wanted to make sure that we were focused on anti-racist leadership, anti-racist practices, a deeper learning towards making sure that our students are prepared as graduates, and then our complete focus on a real authentic partnership with the community and with our parents. Next slide. So for that first box, as you saw, more consistent structures, one of the issues in the spring were that there wasn't synchronous learning where teachers were actually on the screen. It was more directive towards students, like going to a certain digital wall to get the information or to get the lesson. We have more synchronous learning now, at least 2 hours for students. As you see, no less than 2 hours. So it's at least 2 hours, and many teachers are going well above that. But you can see now the amount of instruction that occurs by grade level and the amount of synchronous learning that occurs. And this was a big request from our parents. We had town halls over the summer, and this was one of the areas that they said they need consistency and more teacher face time. Next slide. This is more around making sure that it is consistent. So you see that daily instructional minutes, and this just gives you the difference between synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is face-to-face, and asynchronous is when a student can be directed to go to a certain place to get the lesson. One other thing I'll say quickly is that we also have a TV show. I'll give a little plug. It's on Monday through Friday on KTVU Plus. So you have to look that up. For me, it's channel 36, but it'll be different in different areas. But it's a daily show for TK through second grade learners. So if your learner is not one who learns best from Zoom or from on the computer, you definitely should check out our SF Loves Learning, which is on KTVU Plus. Next slide. And this just gives you our fall distribution plan for us, passing out both digital and non-digital, and it shows you what we have gone through to make sure that our students have the devices and the non-digital materials that they need in order to learn. Next slide. Once again, you can see the digital, so these are some of the digital resources for our students. This is just a sample, and you can see for our PK through two students, we have a program called Seesaw that they absolutely love. 3 through 12 are using Google Classroom, where those teachers are actually face-to-face with the classroom of students. And what we have done, we realized the importance of, because we were March 13th, we were thrown into this. And from March until now, and especially through the summer, what we did was we spent a lot of time on professional development to make sure our teachers were prepared, much better prepared to deliver the content to students. Just want to check in. Is the microphone better now?
Much better.
Okay. Next slide. So this goes back to our focus when we're looking for those first groups coming back. So I talked about for the small group instruction, what we're looking at is our youngest learners, our early ed learners, and then our severe mod students who have severe or moderate disabilities. As we continue to widen that circle for thinking about who we're bringing back next in a larger group, what we're looking at is students with IEPs, our English learners, our foster students, and then students who we were challenged to engage. So what we know is that distance learning is not how we, as a system, is not how we operate at our highest level. It just isn't. We've learned a lot, and I think that there will be more hybrid as we move forward as a community and as an institution. But we know that right now, our best learning, our best instruction is when we're face-to-face. So it's figuring out who we're going to bring back, how we're going to bring them back, and how we're going to make sure they're safe once data and science suggest it's safe to do so. Next slide. I talked earlier about wellness and authentic partnership, and this just gives you a sense of some of the areas that we are now engaged in and have improved upon. So you can see our regular communications with families. We've made sure that it's ongoing communications. Every Wednesday, there is a digest that goes out, and you can, if you're not a parent of San Francisco Unified, you can get access to it still on our website. And that digest is the best way, we continue to say, the best way to get the most current information about what's coming next. So even if you're not a parent of San Francisco Unified, but you want to know what's going on in the larger educational system in San Francisco, please, please, please go to our website and get access to the Wednesday Digest. Goes out every Wednesday evening at 5 o'clock. We're going to continue to have town halls. The more will be coming up over the next few weeks because we need to know what our community says and what our community is thinking about our plans to move forward. And on our website, there are just a ton of resources, including meals and food distribution. You can get wellness checks, as I talked about. Our live link line is on there, as well as we have forums for the community-based organizations. So the best way to get information is through our website as we continue to reach out to our community to make sure we're having authentic partnerships. Next slide. This just talks more about authentic partnerships, so you'll be able to go through this later. I'm trying to stay within my 10 minutes, so next slide. And this, as I just talked about, the opportunities for resources, we have the plan for fall learning that we developed over the summer. And while we were developing that, our instructional team was developing our distance learning guide. So one is the overall fall learning plan is overall our approach to fall learning, but the distance learning guide is much more detailed, especially down to the grade level, down to the unit level on what you can expect in our classrooms. So this is an opportunity for families to go in and see exactly what can be expected. All of this is available on our website. The family distance learning guide is much more aimed towards and uses much less. We in education have a tendency to use a lot of acronyms. So the family distance learning guide is much more family friendly. And then there's also a guide to our approach to the first 30 days of school. All this is available on our website. Next slide. More resources available to you. So I just want to make sure we're getting those out. At every opportunity we have, we're trying to guide people to our website so you know the resources that are available to you and to the communities. So I hope that those of you who are listening today, even if you're not a part of the San Francisco Unified, does not mean that these resources are not available. You actually live in the East Bay, and when I come, I do the closing song on the TV show, and the students, the young people on my block who don't attend San Francisco Unified want me to sing the song with them. So that just tells you that we know, as Kashif said earlier, that we are one community, all coming together. We may have differences, but we're all coming together. And so the resources that are available from San Francisco Unified are available. We don't just say they're for our students or our families. The entire city, the entire community, Bay Area community is our family. So please take advantage. And next slide. And this goes more into what we're doing now around wellness checks and making sure that our students and our families, reaching out to them to make sure that they are well. Next slide. Gives you a sense of where we're continuing to reach out to students. And then you can see the sites where we have grab and go meals, where these have been available since March 13th and through the summer. We as a district determined that we were not going to stop. Some districts stopped over the summer and then started again in the fall. We continue to serve meals, and we continue to serve meals now. We have 18 sites for our students and families. And then we also have a talk line to help students and our parents with the stress that comes with this pandemic. Next slide. And I just want to thank you all today for one, for being here, for two, for giving me this opportunity. I always love the opportunity to share what we're doing. One of the things I will end with is kind of what I'll tail off to what Kashif was talking about earlier when he talked about patience. One of the things that we talk about in the district is none of us were around in 1918. Pretty sure, at least we weren't in our positions that we're in now. And with that in mind, we haven't been through a pandemic. So one of the things we say is we want to operate with grace and compassion. Grace is unmerited favor that we may or may not deserve. And so when you think about grace and compassion, we want to remind ourselves that no one has gone through this. So we're trying to understand and trying to do it the best we can. And we want to give people that grace and compassion, that same understanding that we know you haven't gone through this. So let's work together to figure it out. And I just appreciate this opportunity that you're giving me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. And just a reminder, all of this slide deck as well as the links to resources will be sent along with this recording to those who are listening now and our broader e-subscriber list. Anna Validze, please pick up.
Thank you. And if you could bring up the slides, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much to the Interfaith Council for allowing me to present along with Dr. Matthews and all the other esteemed guests. I'm here to present from the Department of Public Health on the Safer Schools reopening in San Francisco. Next slide, please. So the safer reopening of kindergarten through high school is a major priority within the mayor's reopening plan. We want to make sure that it is absolutely as safe as possible to open schools. So we need to meet minimum health and safety standards. And we recognize that we won't be able to completely eliminate the risk of COVID-19 in any setting, including schools, but we are working very hard to prevent and mitigate the spread of this virus as much as possible. So I'm going to present some of our standard measures that we are recommending for schools in order to make it as safe as possible. So first of all, we have established baseline criteria to serve as a basis for reopening schools that will ground us in the data and science as we move forward in reopening. Research shows that when we can reopen schools as safely as possible when there are lower rates of community transmission, which we are at that stage right now in San Francisco. So we are using the criteria of the following criteria as evidence of low community transmission, which is our status on the state tiered system. Right now we are in red. And if, according to the state, if a county is in the red tier or below, the county can move forward with school reopening. We are also using 3 key public health indicators as locally to decide how we move forward. And the first one is on cases, making sure that the case rate is stable and declining. Also that hospitalization rates are stable and declining. And the test positivity rate in San Francisco is under 3% in order to move forward. Next slide, please. So with all sectors, the Department of Public Health publishes guidance on how to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. And this is our guidance on the safer reopenings of schools. This is based on best practices and research and also the state guidance that was published on July 17th that will require not just elementary schools, this slide is slightly incorrect, but all school reopening plans to address the following. Some of them are very school specific and some of them are universal to all settings. Those that are school specific are daily symptom screenings for all students and staff that are on site. We want to have schools establish small, stable cohorts within their schools, essentially creating mini households within a classroom and as small as possible to minimize the spread in the event that there is a case. Minimizing the amount of movement within the school, especially with entrances, exits, and within the hallways. We want to make sure that there's staff training and family education, what the triggers are for switching to distance learning and school communication plans. I have just realized I actually forgot a pretty critical bullet is that specifically for schools, the health department is requiring that all teachers and staff have what we call routine asymptomatic testing. So all teachers and staff must get tested prior to the start of school and then get repeated over the course, repeat testing over the course of reopening per the state requirements, so that all staff and teachers are tested over the course of 2 months on a repeated basis, and then repeat the next 2 months, et cetera, et cetera. Universal practices that we are recommending in a school setting is, of course, cleaning and disinfection, that everyone, that all the teachers and staff must wear face coverings. And according to the state guidance, it is absolutely required that a student in 3rd grade or above wear face coverings, and it is strongly recommended for 2nd grade and below to wear face coverings. Healthy hygiene practices, making sure everyone is washing their hands or has access to soap and hand sanitizer. Contact tracing, close contact, testing for if anyone, including students and staff, if they are symptomatic or considered a close contact, and physical distancing as well, which is extremely critical actually for the staff. We know that COVID-19 is a virus that is primarily spread from adult to adult, and that we see higher rates of cases and hospitalizations with adults. So we are as focused on staff safety as much as we are on student safety. Next slide, please. So they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. So we will have to go from this picture on the left, which is what we all remember from our high school days, to the picture on the right. And this is how we will have a safer school reopening with COVID-19. Next slide, please. Just to give a quick timeline, what is our goal for school reopening? Just in general, on July 17th, the state released guidance on TK through 12 schools and made it a requirement for all counties on the watch list to prohibit school reopening except creating a waiver process. And so we had just been placed on the watch list the day before this guidance came out. So we were required to comply in San Francisco. We moved forward with creating a waiver process. And the day we released the waiver process in August is the day that the state switched from a watch list to a tiered system and placed us in the red tier and below. And with that, we are now permitted to consider full school reopening, including middle and high school. So with that, in September, we are taking not to lose the momentum we created in the summer, we're taking the applications that we received from the waiver process and reviewing them as fast as we possibly can, and approving them on a rolling basis. And it is this two-step process for the review, which I will get into later in the slide deck, excuse me. And then in October, we will be reviewing all the other applications for TK through 8 schools, depending on the review process. And then in November, we will be looking at high schools. Of all the educational settings, the research shows that teenagers can contract, transmit, and suffer symptoms of COVID-19 as much as adults. So we want to take a special look at high schools and making sure that it is safe as possible. So we will be looking at that later on. We are looking at the equity measures in order to prioritize school reopening. So asking for the % of free and reduced lunch, and free and reduced price meals, as well as the % of financial aid a school offers. And those schools would be prioritized for opening as we get these applications reviewed and approved. Next slide, please. In the meantime, we know that school is closed, and yet parents and families and caregivers need to have some support for distance learning. So we have created a document and a process called Out of School Time, which will support any type of program for youth, including community hubs or learning hubs, whether they're they're private or publicly funded. And DCYF has launched their community hubs this past Monday, which is serving over time, which will serve approximately 6,000 children. And so we have created this guidance to make sure that those settings are as safe as possible to support students and their families, and particularly those in underserved neighborhoods. This guidance also includes information on recreation care and youth sports per the state guidance, which is basically youth sports is very limited with small, stable cohorts of physical activity that can only be done outside, and there can be no physical contact. So there's no games, no scrimmages, no competition, basically just some physical conditioning and drills. Next slide, please. To get ready, we spent much of the summer creating a lot of guidance and orders. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can see we have updated the health order, and we have issued health directives and guidance for higher education, for out of school time, for childcare, and for elementary schools. And we are constantly updating these as we get more information and best practices in research, as well as information from the state. We have also created some supporting documents for any programs that serve youth, such as health checks for children, a quick guide for all of these settings for when there is a case or an exposure and what to do, and communication templates, and an FAQ on contact tracing for these providers. Next slide, please. In the meantime, all of the documents that I mentioned previously were more public facing in COVID Command. We have been working very hard internally to making sure that we are ready to support schools when they are open, and the community hubs, so that we can provide a full set of services. And this includes prevention and mitigation. Our hub is responsible for communicating with schools and community hubs on best practices and providing a lot of technical assistance. We are focusing on the priority populations and areas and schools that are most impacted by COVID-19. Any updates to info and guidance, and then the review process for the school reopening, which is 2 stages. We're reviewing the applications as they are submitted to making sure that the schools can implement their mitigation efforts, but we're also we have created a team, and we're conducting preventative site assessments to support the schools as much as possible and set them up for success to make sure they are in compliance, and we can see it on the physical building. So this is our first week. We started scheduling the site assessments, and we're working very hard to get those completed as quickly and effectively as possible. And then the rest of our COVID Command is working hard on supporting testing, both routine asymptomatic testing as well as symptomatic close contact testing for these school sites, as well as contact tracing, case investigation, outbreak management, and of course, making sure that we capture all the metrics and the data and the evaluation, so as we move forward. And so as schools open, and the community hubs, we are ready to handle any cases or clusters or outbreaks that may occur. Next slide, please. And that is actually it for me. So thank you very much for allowing me to present, and it's been an honor. Thank you.
Anna and Dr. Matthews, thank you so much. Please don't go anywhere, because our panel now will begin to present, and each one of them is going to ask a question for your response. Education is core to the DNA of communities of faith, and here in San Francisco, we are blessed to have a number of very diverse education opportunities from our faith community. Our first panelist is Dr. Dan Glass. He is the head of school at the Brandeis School. And so Dr. Glass, if you could share with us a little bit about how you and the Brandeis School are responding to the COVID pandemic, and then pose a question to our guests.
Certainly. Thank you, Reverend Pappas. It's an honor for me to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this gathering, and really appreciate all the words that have been shared up to this point. Like Dr. Matthews and my friend Kashif Abdullah, I am a San Francisco native, although I am a product of Berkeley Public Schools, not San Francisco Public Schools, because my parents moved across the Bay. It's a really challenging time, I think, for all of us who work in education. The Brandeis School of San Francisco is a K-8 Jewish day school down near San Francisco State, Lake Merced on Brotherhood Way. We have been around since the early 1960s as the only Jewish elementary school in the city. And what I wanted to share this morning in terms of how we have been responding to this, I feel very grateful at this time to be part of a community that is rooted in a faith tradition. It does give us a lot of language and modes for addressing the questions that this pandemic, I think, has posed to all of us. So one of the frames that we have been using to think about this all is a notion in the Jewish tradition called pekuach nefesh. And the idea of pekuach nefesh is that saving a life, saving a human life, actually supersedes all other laws, all other commandments in the Jewish tradition. And so, how can we act in a way that really affirms and recognizes the sacredness of human life? And so, on the one hand, you might say, okay, well, that's gonna point you in the direction of maximum safety, right? And maybe the safest thing that we could do, to Anna's point, and I've been lucky to have the opportunity to learn from Anna across a variety of presentations that she's given to the school communities in San Francisco. You cannot set up a situation that is completely free of risk in having students come back. But at the same time too, we also see that, as a school that focuses not just on academic preparation or even just ethical or moral preparation, but also spiritual preparation of kids, we're certainly seeing the spiritual impact on our students as they are apart from one another, and the impact on their lives as they are moving through the world, as it's changed so dramatically around all of them and all of us. And so, I think that what we have been wrestling with is how do you create a space where we can safely bring as much of our community back as we possibly can. It's interesting to be speaking to this right in this moment, because for those of you who are familiar with the Jewish tradition may know, tomorrow is Erev Rosh Hashanah. Tomorrow is the start of the Jewish New Year. And the one of the things that supposedly happens at the time of Rosh Hashanah is that your name is inscribed in the book of life or the book of death for the year to come. So, in the year ahead, you will either live or you will die. It will depend on your actions in the world. But actually, the majority of people are not inscribed in either the book of life or the book of death on Rosh Hashanah. The majority of people have this period of time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement in the Jewish tradition, to kind of get straight and figure out whether their actions cause them to be deserving of being inscribed in the book of life. And I think for the Jewish people and in the Jewish tradition, Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. And one of the things that we do on Yom Kippur is we say a prayer called the Vidui, and that prayer is a kind of taking responsibility for what has happened in the world in this previous year. And one of the things that's really interesting is that you move from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur from, you know, individual accountability to collective accountability. And in the Vidui, what you say is not, I have sinned, I have done these things. You say, we have done these things, even if we ourselves have not actually done them. And so the question that I want to pose to our esteemed panelists, to Dr. Matthews and to Anna, is really one of equity. I really appreciated that for our local Department of Public Health, when they took the state level waiver application, they added a section to it on equity and asked each school that is considering trying to reopen how they are going to address matters of equity. And I think for all of us here on this call, I imagine we are all members of different faith communities. And what I would love to hear Dr. Matthews and Anna speak to is how we as members of the faith, these various faith communities, can support efforts toward an equitable reopening of schools throughout San Francisco.
Time for
That's my
response.
question.
Yeah, I had to be able to unmute. I'll start, if you don't mind, Anna. I would say what's key is in your reopening plans that you're really specific about regarding students who have been, who you've been least able to connect with. If it's just what I've found is if it's just a global statement about reopening for all, that doesn't address that, there's this expectation that if we put global statements out and we say this will benefit all students, we've seen how those plans have had tremendously different effects on especially low-income students of color. And I'm not sure how many are at Brandeis, but I would say it's looking at students who you know that you've been least able to impact. And then the question becomes, the plan should be how you're going to do more for those students, because that's what equity is. Equity is not equality. Equality is doing the same for all. Equity is recognizing who we need to do more for and then actually doing more for them. And that's, for me, from my perspective, the best way, if you're really looking at how you're going to do this in an equitable way, or a way that's going to have impact for the students who need it most, that it's specifically called out in your plan.
Anna, did you want to?
I'll add something real quick. Of course, I agree with the superintendent and his response. A couple of things I would add is that when we added that, we didn't want to be very prescriptive. We wanted to hear any creative ideas from schools on how they could support equity. But there are, not only is it students from underserved neighborhoods or low income that are least able to connect, but there are other populations such as students with disabilities, either learning differences or physical issues that really have a difficult time with distance learning. And we did issue a directive allowing schools to host those students in person per the state, because I think the state realized that this wasn't working and that those students needed to come in for wraparound services. So that is another measure of equity to address, as well as looking at your greater community. And it's not just about your school, your enrollment and your school community, but where are you located? Is it a neighborhood that is more impacted by COVID-19? Or do you have the capacity if you are contracting with a testing lab, would you consider offering that to the neighborhood for people that may be more impacted? Flu season is coming up and we're looking for sites to help with flu vaccinations. Would you open that up to the community as well? Would you help cover the costs for some of that? Is that there's all a financial underpinning to all of this. So those are just some tiny ideas, but taking a broader look, because that COVID is like, we're all in this together. If we don't practice all of these mitigation measures together, we will have rising cases. So how can we better connect our communities? And that is one of the beautiful things about the Interfaith Council, and let's focus on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Moving up to Nob Hill, we welcome Kate Juergens, who is the lower school director for the Cathedral School for Boys.
Good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here amongst a community that I so admire, and I think, as Anna just referenced, is so important these days more than ever. Cathedral School for Boys is a kindergarten through 8th grade, all boy Episcopal school right in the center of Nob Hill, and we are located quite directly next to Grace Cathedral. And when we are all on campus together, we have the great fortune of being in Grace Cathedral's space 3 times a week. And much of what has been explained with Dr. Matthews and Anna and Dr. Glass just now really resonates with me. As a school, from the moment of the shelter-in-place order to this morning, we have been focused on predominantly one element of our school's mission that really rings true, and that's to create a community that is bonded by open-heartedness, hope, compassion, and concern. And so using that tenet has really given us great foresight and support in dealing with all the different difficulties that have come to pass with the COVID pandemic. And what we've tried to do is keep our community at the forefront of everything. And working with young children, kindergarten through 8th grade, what we realized very quickly, which we knew to be true, but had to put into practice quickly as the shelter-in-place order came to be, was the notion that with disruption, any type of disruption in a child's life, in a family's life, we need consistency, and we need compassion, and we need community. And so a couple of things that our school has been able to do, which has been echoed among my peers here, is directly related to supporting those in our community. And those include our students, our families, and our staff. And specifically, as we look to reopening and trying to find a way to bring our community back safely on campus, we have those 3 groups at the forefront of our thinking. But a couple of the things, and I apologize, I'm proof of distance learning. I have my middle school child in the background doing PE class right now, so I apologize if you hear any thumping. It's badminton right now, so who knows what's gonna happen, so I apologize, I'll preface that. We developed really early on a Cathedral School support fund for all of our community members, be it families, be it staff members who, by virtue of the pandemic, were experiencing any type of hardship. And that was, we were fortunate enough to put that into place really early on and help support any families or staff members that needed additional support. We instituted back in the spring and have continued individual outreach to families and staff members who needed support, everything from technology needs to Wi-Fi, internet access, to counseling support. And Dr. Matthews talked at length about being a resource for families during this time, which has been an absolute necessity for us, especially those families with young children for whom being on Zoom for any length of time can be a real challenge. One of the tenets of Cathedral that is so important to us, and Dr. Glass was referencing how important faith has been for his community. The same holds true for Cathedral. And we very quickly realized back in March that we needed to maintain that continuity of our chapel services. And we were able to present 3 weekly chapel services through Zoom. And we learned all the ins and outs of hymn sing and mute and all the wonderful challenges that is presented with that. But what that's done for us, that continuity of community, I think has alleviated some of the unknown and alleviated some of the stress that is inevitable in this situation. And finally, I want to talk, I mean, I could go into all the details of all the nitty-gritty things that we've done, but really for us, it's been all about community. But I'll end by saying that every year in the lower school at Cathedral School for Boys, we have a lower school theme. Last year's theme was Choose Optimism. And those themes help us guide children and families through really big topics and big conversations. And at the start of this webinar today, Kashif was referencing patience and perseverance, and then Dr. Matthews mentioned grace and compassion. And both of those really resonated with me, particularly because this year's lower school theme at Cathedral School for Boys is practice patience. Practice patience. And we specifically chose that in light of the year in front of us. And it also resonates with children, it resonates with adults, and it certainly resonates in this global effort that we are all engaged in. And so I just share that in light of the fact that we are surrounded by so many different faiths and so many different types of schools, that regardless, the common thread is there. And now I would like to ask a question of Dr. Matthews, if I may. I am ever the optimist, and one of the most important pieces of this whole experience that I'm trying to reap is, what can I learn? What can I learn from this, and what can we develop, and what can we continue? So Dr. Matthews, I would ask you, in your work and in all of the experience that you've had from March until this morning, what have you learned that you foresee might be continued when the pandemic is no longer a worry? Is there anything innovative in your approach and response that you think could continue on in the development of education?
Thank you for that question. I'll say quickly, and then I'll talk about the third one, which has been a pet peeve. I'd say the things we've learned, I'm not sure if we've learned, but we've known we've needed to do them for some time. There's a saying, the saying is, we know the skill that it takes, but the question is, do we have the will? So an example of that is, we've known that we've had this digital divide, and we know to close the digital divide, we have to put devices in students' hands who don't have them. So we've known that that's a skill, but we haven't had the will as a community, as an institution, as a society to do that until the pandemic hit. And then, yes, so now every student in San Francisco Unified who wanted a device has a device. All they had to do is come tell it. Even students who have broken them quickly have gotten a new device. So we put in device, it's amazing for some how quickly, a week later, it's like, are you kidding me? But anyway, we put devices in students' hands, but then the device is only, it's like a plate if you don't have the ability to connect. So, and we've known that. So it's the whole thing about, we know the skill, but we haven't done it. So I would say in two big ways. One is the digital divide. We've known that's there, but now we have closed that. The question is, are we going to keep those devices in students' hands? And from my perspective, it's a big yes, but we'll see as we move forward. Because I've learned that a superintendent is in charge, but not in control. So that's one. The second one is around the connectedness and the wellness piece and checking in with families. We've known that we've needed to do that, but we have, so that's a skill, but not a will. We haven't had the will to do it until now. And now it's this constant check-in. So those are two that I believe that we have learned. We knew, we've learned even more. We started doing it, and I don't see any way that we can go back. The third and the bigger one has been just a pet peeve of mine since, this is my 34th year in education. And as Kashif's age will demonstrate, my 34th year in education. And one of the things that I've constantly said, so my son, he would go to school. He's now in college, out of college, but he would go to school when he was in high school. And a phrase he would often say is when he left school, he would say, now I get to go back to the future. And what he meant by that was when he went to school, school was the only place that said, put your technology away. You're not allowed to use technology. Get out a paper and pencil. He said the only place he used paper and pencil was in school. He didn't, everything else was digital. so put your technology away. And then, so he felt like in going to school, he was going back to the 1950s. And then once he got out of school, now I get to come back to, 2012 or whatever year it was. And that was, and I've been saying this forever, is that we are preparing students to thrive in the 21st century, yet we're doing it in a 1950s way. We haven't used the technology. We haven't gotten students prepared for technology. What I often think about is Twitter. Twitter told on Tuesday, March 18th or March 16th, 17th, they told their employees go home. And Wednesday, you didn't hear anybody saying, oh, Twitter went down. But look at the difference in what happened with us when we said everybody go home. And look how even today, we're still not where we need to be. And so if we're the institution that's supposed to prepare students for the 21st century, my hope is that what we've really learned is that we're not at that place that we need to be. And my hope is that as we move forward, we would get ourselves to a place where we're actually looking at what's coming, what's around the corner. What are students going to need in 2040 and 2050? And then what do we need to do as an institution to make sure we're preparing students for 2040, not for a world that no longer exists with paper and pencil?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Matthews. When I think about an umbrella in San Francisco for the larger number of schools of faith, I think about the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and we are very blessed to have with us today the Superintendent of Catholic Schools, Pamela Lyons. Pamela, you are in a challenging situation, yet in the midst of crisis, there are opportunities. Would you share with us the response of the Archdiocese, and in particular, as Superintendent of Catholic Schools, your response to the pandemic?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be able to join this very important conversation. So thank you, Reverend Pappas, for inviting me. I also want to thank Anna and her team for spending so much time with my team and our school leadership to clarify guidance and answer our questions, because as you know, things seem to be changing daily. And having her and her team, Maria Sue, they have been really vital to myself and our schools understanding and navigating through this health crisis. So I'm glad that she's on the call and I'll be able to thank her. And Dr. Matthews, he and I had a phone conversation shortly after our schools closed. And certainly we are, as Dr. Matthews said, we are all in this together. So we are partnering in every way that we possibly can. As Catholics, one of our core beliefs is that all human beings are created in the image and likeness of God, and that all life is precious. So I just want to reiterate what Dr. Glass said about our schools and are not just concerned with the health of our students physically, but we're also concerned with their spiritual and their emotional health. And so that has to play a big piece in how we approach COVID and how we approach our hope to return to in-person instruction. The other thing I wanted to just say is Dr. Matthews mentioned grace and compassion. And I think the skills that those of us that are in leadership and education, whether it's a principal or a head of school or a president of a school, the skills that we have cultivated over our careers are not necessarily the skills that we are using at the moment. For example, long-range planning. Most leaders in education are excellent at long-range planning. And that is something that is really hard to do right now. So those people who are on the call, I just say be kind to your school leaders, because this is a very challenging time for them as they're trying to navigate this. There's so many different opinions coming at them. So whenever I can, I always remind people to be compassionate when it comes to your school leaders, because they really are doing the best job that they possibly can. Just to give everybody a very high-level overview of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, we serve students in Marin County, San Francisco County, and San Mateo County. And we have a total of 86 schools preschool through grade 12, and we serve approximately 24,000 students. Our schools serve a wide range of students. So I think sometimes people think private school and they think, oh, well, those are just wealthy students. But that's definitely not true of the Archdiocese. We serve students in the mission. We serve students also, you know, in wealthier areas. So we really do serve a wide variety of students. We offer a lot of tuition assistance to some of our to students that are in lower economic areas of our 3 counties, and we certainly would not consider ourselves to be a wealthy school system. In February, we actually started to plan distance learning, and not just because of COVID. You know, COVID was definitely in our mind because we were hearing more and more about that on the news. But also things like air quality. We had to close schools last year for a day because of air quality, weather, different reasons why our schools might have to close. So we wanted to start really looking forward to other options so students weren't just losing days of school when our school buildings were not able to be open. On March 12th, that was our first day that we closed in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And we actually closed a couple of days before our public school systems in our 3 counties, because we had a confirmed case of COVID of a student at one of our schools. And after spending 2 days the previous weekend on the phone with our 3 county health departments and many of my principals and presidents, it became very clear to me that we were dealing with something that was like nothing we'd ever dealt with before. And I felt like I wanted to just hit the pause button for 2 weeks. That was our intention, so that we could wrap our arms around what was happening so that we could go back then safely. And of course, the 2 weeks, unfortunately, ended up being the remaining of the school year. And now here we are at the beginning of this school. We're really not even at the beginning anymore. And we are, for the majority of my schools, we are still in distance learning. Over the summer, all of our presidents and principals worked very hard. They really had no summer break on their return to school plans. So all of the Archdiocesan schools have return to school plans that we are very anxious to be able to implement. And I will say that given the waivers that Anna spoke about, and also the fact that 2 of our 3 counties are now in the red tier as opposed to the purple tier, our schools are applying to return. Our hope is that anytime between the end of September and the end of October, the majority of our schools will have some type of in-person learning on their campuses. Now, I say that with a little bit of caution because every single one of our schools is different. Every single one of our schools will be on different timelines. Even though we're an archdiocese, it's a little bit different than a district because each school site is really like their own little kingdom, because the pastor, canon law, being Catholic, is really in charge of their campus. So while we support and we encourage and we advise our schools, every school is really a separate entity. So what I don't want to happen is to have anyone on this call to go back and say, oh, the superintendent said all of our schools are opening at the end of September, because that's definitely not the case. We will have some schools in Marin that will be opening to in-person instruction on September 28th. And then we have some schools in San Francisco and San Mateo that have applied to reopen and have rollout plans, like I said, anywhere between the end of September to the end of October. My personal hope is that all of our schools will have some type of in-person instruction happening by the end of October. But of course, that's very dependent on us getting approval from our county health departments, and also that our COVID stays either the way it's steady or our numbers go down. If we have a spike, then things could change. We definitely want our students back, particularly our TK through 2nd grade students who really need to be in school. But obviously we want to do it safely, and we want to do it as smartly as we possibly can. One additional thing, and again, I'm not trying to be controversial or political here, but in addition to my role as superintendent, I'm also the vice president for the board of directors for a group called CAPSO, which is California Association of Private School Organizations. And we have several faith-based schools as well as non-faith-based private schools in our network. And just to address the issue of equity, I certainly, believe in equity, and all of our schools I know want to do our part in our local communities. But I think it is important to just mention that private schools at this point are not receiving any funding from the CARES Act money that was put aside for education. And that is that's a California state decision. So things are not really as equitable as we would like. And so while we would love to help out with paying for testing or paying for services in our local communities, our schools are hurting financially, and not being able to have access to that funding has hurt our schools. And so I think it's important to look at the big picture when we're looking at equity, because we are tuition based, and we serve families that are out of work or have been furloughed and are struggling, and we want to be able to work with those families. So just wanted to throw that out there again, just to give another perspective. I think my question would be for Dr. Matthews, and I apologize. So obviously COVID is a huge crisis right now, but also over the summer we've seen racial justice issues resurface. They've always been there, but definitely we've seen a resurface of those major concerns around racial justice. And I'm struggling a little bit as a superintendent of my schools into, how do I deal with COVID and then also address this really important issue of racial justice. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little more about how San Francisco public schools are addressing racial justice in your schools.
Yes, and I'm going to answer that, and then I apologize. I actually have a 9:45, so I'm going to have to leave right after this answer. But once again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and hopefully at some point you'll invite me back, and I'm more than willing to come back and spend more time with you. So for us, we realized that, and for instance, the incidents that have happened through the summer aren't singular in nature. This is an ongoing fight, an ongoing issue, an ongoing commitment for the San Francisco Unified District. But I'll say particularly in the last 2 years, what we have done is we've spent a considerable amount of time with professional development for our administrators, all of our administrators. We have over 400 administrators, 130 site administrators, and then other administrators, central office administrators throughout the district, on a three-pronged approach, which we're looking at white supremacy culture, microaggressions, and then racial bias. And so this has allowed our administrators to have entry points into where they are in their personal journey, anywhere in along that spectrum. And we've spent professional development with our administrators in those areas. And then now what is happening is there's an actual expectation that administrators are going to this year do 3 lessons lead 3 professional developments with their staff members, whether you're a central office staff member or a site administrator, in those 3 areas: white supremacy culture, microaggressions, or racial bias. We believe that in order to attack systemic oppression, there has to be a recognition that it exists, and then you talked about long-range planning. In this area, we did have the opportunity to do long-range planning. We just had to change it from in-person to Zoom, but we have a real focus on those areas, because we know that in order for change to happen, the most important place in our system is the classroom, because that's where the interaction between the teacher and the student takes place. But what leverages those interactions is the site administrator. So making sure the site administrators have that knowledge, with a lot of background and support, and then expecting the site administrators to now move it into teachers so that it actually improves the interaction between teachers and students. So once again, I appreciate you all. I apologize. I have a meeting with actually a board member, so I'm gonna sign off right now. Thank you, and look forward to anybody back.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. And Anna had to sign off as well. We very much appreciate the gift of time that you gave us, and we hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you.
And to Pamela, I want to say thank you both for your question, both for your for sharing with us at the issue of the funding issue that you raised, because I think that's an important issue. And I have to make a confession: when I introduced you and talked about umbrellas, I didn't see the picture in the background behind us. So I think that it was kismet. I want to say a very special thank you to all of those who took their time today, not only Dr. Matthews and Anna, but also to Kashif Abdullah, to Dr. Dan Glass, to Kate Juergens and Pamela Lyons. It's been a rich conversation, and the content of this will, as I mentioned earlier, will be sent later today in the recording link, as well as links to resources that will be helpful as well. As we're saying thank you, I want to say a very special thank you to San Francisco Interfaith Council Administrative Program Associate Cynthia Zambucas, who does so much for us and helps to facilitate these gatherings, as well as the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team, in particular, Coordinator John McKnight, Producer Lynn Mays, and Lead Sharon Walton, who have been just consistent and wonderful and have enabled these programs to take place. We invite you to join us next week when we welcome the co-chair of the San Francisco Economic Recovery Task Force, as well as president and CEO of the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, Rodney Fong, who will address the work of the task force, but as well the issues of unemployment and economic impact of the COVID-19 on San Francisco. This concludes today's program. We look forward to seeing you all next week. And again, thank you to all our participants today.